The Avesta is the primary collection of religious texts of Zoroastrianism, composed in the otherwise unrecorded Avestan language. The Avesta texts fall into several different categories, arranged either by dialect or by usage. The principal text in the liturgical group is the Yasna, which takes its name from the Yasna ceremony, Zoroastrianism's primary act of worship, and at which the Yasna text is recited. The most important portion of the Yasna texts are the 5 Gathas, consisting of 17 hymns attributed to Zoroaster himself. These hymns, together with 5 other shorter Old Avestan texts that are also part of the Yasna, are in the Old Avestan language. The remainder of the Yasna's texts are in Younger Avestan, which is not only from a later stage of the language, but also from a different geographic region. Extensions to the Yasna ceremony include the texts of the Vendidad and the Visparad. The Visparad extensions consist mainly of additional invocations of the divinities, while the Vendidad is a mixed collection of prose texts mostly dealing with purity laws. Even today, the Vendidad is the only liturgical text that is not recited entirely from memory. Some of the materials of the extended Yasna from the Yash, which are hymns to the individual Yazutas. Unlike the Yasna, Visparad and Vendidad, the Yash and the other lesser texts of the Avesta are no longer used liturgically in high rituals. Aside from the Yash, these other lesser texts include the Nyush texts, the Gar texts, the Sirosa, and various other fragments. Together, these lesser texts are conventionally called Quarter Avesta or Little Avesta texts. When the first Quarter Avesta editions were printed in the 19th century, these texts became a book of common prayer for lay people. Historiography. The surviving texts of the Avesta, as they exist today, derive from a single master copy produced by Sasanian Empire-era collation and recension. The master copy, now lost, is known as the Sasanian archetype. The oldest surviving manuscript of an Avestan language text is dated 1323 CE. Summaries of the various Avesta texts found in the 9th–10th century texts of Zoroastrian tradition suggest that about 3/4 of the corpus has since been lost. A pre-Sasanian history of the Avesta, if it had one, is in the realm of legend and myth. The oldest surviving versions of these tales are found in the 9th to 11th century texts of Zoroastrian tradition. The legends run as follows. The 21 Nusks of the Avesta were created by Ahura Mazda and brought by Zoroaster to his patron Vishtaspa. Supposedly, Vishtaspa or another Kayanian Derek then had 2 copies made, one of which was stored in the treasury, and the other in the royal archives. Following Alexander's conquest, the Avesta was then supposedly destroyed or dispersed by the Greeks after they translated the scientific passages that they could make use of. Several centuries later, one of the Parthian emperors named Valaksh supposedly then had the fragments collected, not only of those that had previously been written down, but also of those that had only been orally transmitted. The Denkard also transmits another legend related to the transmission of the Avesta. In that story, credit for collation and recension is given to the early Sasanian-era priest Tanzar, who had the scattered works collected, and of which he approved only a part as authoritative. Tanzar's work was then supposedly completed by Ardabad Maraspandan, who made a general revision of the canon and continued to ensure its orthodoxy. A final revision was supposedly undertaken in the 6th century under Khosrau I. In the early 20th century, the legend of the Parthian-era collation engendered a search for a Parthian archetype of the Avesta. In the theory of Friedrich Karl Andreas, the archaic nature of the Avestan texts was assumed to be due to preservation via written transmission. and unusual or unexpected spellings in the surviving texts were assumed to be reflections of errors introduced by Sasanian-era transcription from the Aramaic alphabet-derived Pahlavi scripts. The search for the Arsacid archetype was increasingly criticized in the 1940s and was eventually abandoned in the 1950s after Karl Hofmann demonstrated that the inconsistencies noted by Andreas were actually due to unconscious alterations introduced by oral transmission. Hoffmann identifies these changes to be due in part to modifications introduced through recitation, in part to influences from other Iranian languages picked up on the route of transmission from somewhere in eastern Iran via Arachosia and Sistan through to Persia, and in part due to the influence of phonetic developments in the Avestan language itself. The legends of an Arsacid-era collation and recension are no longer taken seriously. It is now certain that for most of the long history the Avesta's various texts were handed down orally and independently of one another, and that it was not until around the 5th or 6th century that they were committed to written form. However, during the long history, only the Gathic texts seem to have been memorized exactly. The other less sacred works appear to have been handed down in a more fluid oral tradition, and were partly composed afresh with each generation of poet-priests, sometimes with the addition of new material. The younger Avestan texts are therefore composite works with contributions from several different authors over the course of several hundred years. The texts became available to European scholarship comparatively late. Abraham Hyacinth Anquetil-Dupin travelled to India in 1755 and discovered the texts among Indian Zoroastrian communities. He published a set of French translations in 1771, based on translations provided by a Parsi priest. Anquetil-Dupin's translations were at first dismissed as a forgery in poor Sanskrit, but he was vindicated in the 1820s following Rasmus Rask's examination of the Avestan language. Rask also established that Anquetil-Dupin's manuscripts were a fragment of a much larger literature of sacred texts. Anquetil-Dupin's manuscripts are at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, while Rask's collection now lies in the Royal Library, Denmark. Other large Avestan language manuscript collections are those of the British Museum, the K.R. Karma Oriental Library in Mumbai, the Mahajirana Library in Navsari, and at various university and national libraries in Europe. The term Avesta is from Zoroastrian tradition. The meaning of the word is uncertain. Many etymologies have been suggested, but none has been universally accepted. Structure and content. In its present form, the Avesta is a compilation from various sources, and its different parts date from different periods and vary widely in character. Only texts in the Avestan language are considered part of the Avesta. According to the Denkid, the 21 Nasks mirror the structure of the 21-word-long Ahuna prayer. Each of the 3 lines of the prayer consists of 7 words. Correspondingly, the Nasks are divided into 3 groups, of 7 volumes per group. Originally, each volume had a word of the prayer as its name, which so marked a volume's position relative to the other volumes. Only about a quarter of the text from the Nasks has survived until today. The contents of the Avesta are divided topically, but these are not fixed canonical. Some scholars prefer to place the categories in 2 groups, the one liturgical and the other general. The following categorization is as described by Jean Kellens. The Yasna. The Yasna is the primary liturgical collection, named after the ceremony at which it is recited. It consists of 72 sections called the Ha-Itiaha, the 72 threads of lamb's wool in the Kushti. The sacred thread worn by Zoroastrians represent these sections. The central portion of the Yasna is the Gathas, the oldest and most sacred portion of the Avesta, believed to have been composed by Zarathustra himself. The Gathas are structurally interrupted by the Yasna Haptanghiti, which makes up chapters 35 to 42 of the Yasna and is almost as old as the Gathas. Consists of prayers and hymns in honor of the supreme deity Ahura Mazda, the angels, fire, water, and earth. The younger Yasna, though handed down in prose, may once have been metrical, as the Gathas still are. The Visparad, all patrons, is a collection of supplements to the Yasna. The Visparad is subdivided into 23 or 24 cardo that are interleaved into the Yasna during a Visparad service. The Visparad collection has no unity of its own, and is never recited separately from the Yasna. The Vendidad is an enumeration of various manifestations of evil spirits, and ways to confound them. The Vendidad includes all of the 19th Nask, which is the only Nask that has survived in its entirety. The text consists of 22 fargads, fragments arranged as discussions between Ahura Mazda and Zoroaster. The first fargad is a dualistic creation myth, followed by the description of a destructive winter on the lines of the flood myth. The second fargad recounts the legend of Yuma. The remaining fargads deal primarily with hygiene as well as disease and spells to fight it. Fargads 4 and 15 discuss the dignity of wealth and charity, of marriage and of physical effort, and the indignity of unacceptable social behavior such as assault and breach of contract, and specify the penances required to atone for violations thereof. The Vendidad is an ecclesiastical code, not a liturgical manual, and there is a degree of moral relativism apparent in the codes of conduct. The Vendidad's different parts vary widely in character and in age. Some parts may be comparatively recent in origin, although the greater part is very old. The Vendidad, unlike the Yasna and the Visparad, is a book of moral laws rather than the record of a liturgical ceremony. However, there is a ceremony called the Vendidad, in which the Yasna is recited with all the chapters of both the Visparad and the Vendidad inserted at appropriate points. This ceremony is only performed at night. The Yash are a collection of 21 hymns, each dedicated to a particular divinity or divine concept. 3 hymns of the Yasna liturgy that worship by praise are in tradition, also nominally called Yash, but are not counted among the Yasht collection since the 3 are a part of the primary liturgy. The Yash vary greatly in style, quality and extent. In the present form, they are all in prose, but analysis suggests that they may at one time have been in verse. The Zoroaster. The Zoroaster is an enumeration and invocation of the 30 divinities presiding over the days of the month. The Zoroaster exists in 2 forms. The shorter is a brief enumeration of the divinities with their epithets in the genitive. The longer has complete sentences and sections, with the yazatas being addressed in the accusative. The Zoroaster is never recited as a whole, but is a source for individual sentences devoted to particular divinities, to be inserted at appropriate points in the liturgy depending on the day and the month. The Nyayashas. The 5 Nyayashas, abbreviated NY, are prayers for regular recitation by both priests and laity. They are addressed to the sun and Mithra, to the moon, and to the waters and to fire. The Nyayashas are composite texts containing selections from the Gathas and the Yash, as well as later material. The Gas. The 5 Gas are invocations to the 5 divinities that watch over the 5 divisions of the day. Gas are similar in structure and content to the 5 Nyayashas. The Afranagans. The Afranagans are 4 blessing texts recited on a particular occasion. The first in honor of the dead, the second on the 5 epagomenal days that end the year, the third is recited at the 6 seasonal feasts, and the fourth at the beginning and end of summer. Fragments, or material in the Avesta that is not already present in one of the other categories falls into a fragments category, which, as the name suggests, includes incomplete texts. There are altogether more than 20 fragment collections, many of which have no name or only a Middle Persian name. The more important of the fragment collections are the Nirangistan fragments, the Persishniha questions, also known as fragments Tamuras, and the Hadok Nask volume of the scriptures, with 2 fragments of eschatological significance. Other Zoroastrian religious texts, only texts preserved in the Avestan language, count as scripture and are part of the Avesta. Several other secondary works are nonetheless crucial to Zoroastrian theology and scholarship. The most notable among the Middle Persian texts of the Denkid, dating from the 9th century, the Bundarushan, finished in the 11th or 12th century, but containing older material, the Mainogai Kirad, a religious conference on questions of faith, and a book of Adavara, which is especially important for its views on death, salvation and life in the hereafter. Of the post-14th century works, only the Saddath and Rivayats are of doctrinal importance. Other texts such as Zartashnama are only notable for the preservation of legend and folklore. The Aeogemedika we accept, a treatise on death, is based on quotations from the Avesta. Full texts. Wikisource has original text related to this article.